The music room smelled wrong. It had smelled wrong for 3 years now, 2 months, and some number of days that Queen Cyrilith had stopped counting because counting made it worse. The air that used to carry something sweet, something living, had turned. Sour was not quite the right word. It was more like the smell of a flower that had simply given up, still present, still technically itself, but hollowed out, the warmth gone from it. Her attendants had stopped mentioning it by the end of the first year. By the second, they had begun breathing through their mouths when they stood near her. She noticed. She said nothing. She came to this room every morning anyway. There was no good reason for it. The music room was, by any practical measure, useless now. The instruments that lined the walls and filled the shelves had not been touched since the mourning decree passed 6 years ago, a cultural silence that was supposed to last 1 season, to honor the dead, to press pause on celebration while the grief was still raw. 1 season became 2. 2 became a year. The year calcified into something no one remembered how to undo. The instruments gathered dust in the way that beautiful things do when they stop being used. Quietly, without drama, as if they had simply decided to wait. A small stringed instrument sat on the highest shelf, directly in her line of sight from the low chair she always chose. It had been a gift once. She could not play it, had never learned, had meant to, had kept meaning to. It sat there with its strings still taut. Someone had kept it tuned, years ago, out of habit, before the habit stopped. She could see it from here. She never reached for it. The then-airy relationship to sound was not, technically, an emotional one. It was physiological. Their bodies carried harmonic receptors along the inner edges of their petal marks, the pale traceries that ran from collarbone to shoulder in patterns unique to each individual, and those receptors responded to vibration the way eyes responded to light, involuntarily, below the level of decision. A then-airy in silence long enough would begin to dull. Not visibly, not in ways that showed, but the petal marks would settle into their resting lines and stay there. And the scent the body produced, usually sweet or green or warm depending on mood, would slowly lose its complexity and go flat. Her attendants thought she was permanently distressed. She was, but the flatness had become so ordinary that she had stopped noticing it herself, the way you stop noticing the sound of a ship's engines after enough weeks in transit. It was simply the texture of her days now. The room, the chair, the dust on the strings, the smell of nothing. She folded 2 of her hands in her lap. The other 2 rested along the arms of the chair, palms upward, fingers loose. An old habit, a position she had been taught as a child meant openness, receptivity. She did not know why she still held herself this way. There was no one to receive. Outside the high windows, the city moved. She watched it without watching it, the way you watch something you've memorized past the point of seeing. A low sound came from somewhere in the wall to her left. Not music. Nothing as dignified as that. A knock, a rattle, then the unmistakable complaint of a pipe joint that had decided today was the day it would make itself known. She turned her head, slowly, 2 of her arms shifting slightly in the way her body defaulted to when something unexpected entered its field, and watched the maintenance panel in the lower left corner of the wall shudder once, then swing open. He came through sideways, because the panel was not designed for a person to enter gracefully. He was carrying a bag that caught on the frame, and he had to work it free with a short, muttered sound that was not quite a word. He was not young, not old, somewhere in the territory of a human life where a person has stopped being surprised by their own body, but hasn't yet started to resent it. Medium height, hair that had been combed at some point earlier in the morning and had since made its own decisions. His coveralls had a faded patch on the left knee and a smear of something silver-gray on the right forearm. He looked at the panel as he freed his bag. He looked at the pipe running along the base of the wall. He looked at his tools. He did not look at her. The HJ-16 designation on his work order said pipe maintenance. It did not say music room. It said the North Residential Corridor, Sublevel 4, Joint Assessment. Someone in the records office had made an error, or someone had not made an error but had been working from a floor plan that predated the room's current designation. Most likely, no one in the records office had thought to mention that the North Corridor's Sublevel 4 infrastructure ran directly beneath and through the wall of the Queen's private music room. because that was the kind of thing that seemed obvious only after a pipe fitter had already climbed through the panel. He set his bag down on the floor, opened it, took out a wrench with the comfortable ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. The guard at the door had gone very still. A maintenance worker had no business being in here. A maintenance worker had no business being anywhere near here. But the queen had not moved or spoken, and so the guard did not move or speak, and the three of them existed in the room together with a particular awkwardness of a situation that no protocol had thought to address. A pipe fitter had no business making sound in the queen's quarters, but his wrench had already found the joint, and the joint was already answering. He worked with his back to her, mostly. She watched his hands. 4 was the natural number for her. So 2 always struck her as insufficient, as if a human was perpetually working with half the reach they needed, but his 2 hands moved with an efficiency that compensated for their limitation. He checked the joint at 3 points, pressing the flat of his palm against the pipe and holding it there, feeling for vibration. He tapped. He listened. He adjusted his grip and worked the wrench 2 full turns and then 1 partial one, and something in the wall made a small satisfied sound and went quiet. His tool bag was open beside him on the floor, and the instruments inside it were ordinary. A wrench, a pressure gauge, a length of flexible sealant tape, partially used, rolled around 2 fingers and tucked back into its pocket. Nothing that explained why she had shifted, slightly, in her chair. Nothing that explained why her upper 2 arms had unfolded from their resting position and resettled along her knees. Her petal marks moved. Not dramatically. A pulse, really. A small, involuntary shift along her collarbone, the marks brightening by a fraction of a shade before settling again. She did not notice. The guard at the door noticed. The instrument on the high shelf sat directly above where he was working. She could see both of them from the low chair, the man's shoulders, rounded with concentration, and above him the shape of the small instrument catching them all. He leaned in to check the seal. His tool bag sat open on the floor, and the arrangement was exactly as ordinary as it appeared to be. He did not know that this was the room she came to every morning. He did not know about the morning decree. He did not know that the last person to produce sound in this room, intentionally or otherwise, had been the court musician, 6 years ago, playing a farewell song for the dead before the decree came down and the instruments went to their shelves. He was just fixing a pipe. The air in the room smelled, still, of nothing. For a moment, the room held its breath. She watched him check the joint a second time, pressing 2 fingers against the fitting and counting something silently. Her upper arms had not returned to their resting position. She had not told them to move and had not told them to stay. Her body was simply doing what it did when something near it produced a low, constant vibration, and she had not noticed that it was doing it because the petal marks had been still for so long that she had stopped checking. It occurred to her, at some distance, that she should tell the guard to remove him. Protocol was clear. Maintenance class personnel did not produce sound near Queen-level quarters. He either didn't know or didn't care. She did not tell the guard. He checked the joint a 3rd time. Then he sat back on his heels and was satisfied. And then he started to hum. It wasn't a melody. Not precisely. It was 3 notes, informal, the kind of thing a person does when they are pleased with themselves and not performing it for anyone, just the sound of a task well done leaking out of a mouth that wasn't paying attention. He didn't announce it. He didn't stop to consider it. He just hummed 3 notes while he reached for his pressure gauge, and then he stopped humming while he read the gauge, and then the notes came back, slightly quieter, while he wrote something on the small pad he pulled from his chest pocket. On the highest shelf, directly above him, the strings of the small instrument caught the vibration. It was physics. The hum traveled through him into the floor, up through the shelf bracket, into the wood of the shelf, and the strings, still taut after 6 years of waiting, responded to the frequency the way taut strings do. They vibrated, not loudly, barely. The faintest, thinnest sound, too quiet to name as music, too deliberate to dismiss as noise. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds before it faded. She heard it. Her forearms moved once, inward, as if something had struck the air very close to her face, and she had flinched before she knew she was flinching. Then stillness. Her petal marks pulsed, a long, slow expansion of color, gold amber flooding the pale traceries along her collarbone, filling them, then holding. The sour note in the room shifted. Not fully gone, but something opened in it, the way a window opens 1 inch and the whole character of a closed room changes without the room itself changing. The small instrument on the shelf sat silent again. She had not moved from her chair. She was not going to move from her chair. Her 4 hands were pressed, lightly, into her own knees, and that was all that was visible of what had happened inside her. And that was what the guard at the door saw, and the guard at the door stopped breathing for a moment and then very carefully started again. The pipe fitter had not noticed the strings vibrate. He was capping his pressure gauge and tucking his pad back into his pocket, satisfied, unaware, finishing the job. The guard did not know what to do with what had just happened, and neither did the attendant who had materialized in the corridor outside the moment the scent changed. Floral, barely, the thinnest thread of it, weaving out from under the music room door. Not the full sweetness of the Queen's natural scent, not the deep warmth that the older attendants described and the younger ones had only heard about, but not sour either. Something between. Something that had not existed in this corridor for 3 years. The attendant stopped walking. Her hand was raised to knock. She did not knock. She stood with her hand in the air and her eyes finding the guard's face and the guard looking back at her and neither of them saying a word because the word did not exist for what was happening inside the music room. And the protocol did not cover it. And the Queen had not moved, and the pipe fitter was packing his tools. The instrument strings had gone silent again, but the silence had a different quality now. It had weight, the way the air has weight after rain, when everything is the same and nothing is the same and the difference is not visible but is completely real. The guard let out a breath, carefully. The attendant lowered her hand. Down in the room, the pipe fitter zipped his bag. He didn't know what had settled in the room behind him. He didn't know that the Queen's petal marks were still holding color, still flushed with that faint gold ember warmth, or that her upper 2 arms had settled softly across her own shoulders in a self-hold she had not performed in longer than she could clearly remember. He didn't know that the 3 notes he'd hummed without meaning to were sitting in the room's acoustic memory, caught in the wood of the walls, in the dust on the strings, in the changed texture of the air. He just had another job on the 4th floor. Join us for part 2, where we find out what happens when he hums a second time, and whether 3 notes can undo 6 years of silence. She did not move. The panel had closed. His footsteps had faded down the sub-level corridor, going somewhere ordinary, carrying his tools and his 3 notes and his complete ignorance of what he had left behind him. The guard had returned to correct posture. The attendant in the corridor had gone back to wherever attendants went when they had no task to perform. The room was quiet again. She did not move. Her petal marks were still lit. She could feel them. A warmth along her collarbone that she had forgotten was possible. The way you forget what a particular kind of weather feels like until it returns and your body remembers it before your mind does. She did not look down at them. She kept her eyes on the shelf. The instrument sat there. 6 years. She had stopped counting after the 3rd year. Or she had told herself she had stopped, which was not the same thing. The truth was that the number lived in her the way a stone lives in water, present, weighted, not going anywhere. Her 4 arms were still arranged around herself, the upper 2 across her shoulders, the lower 2 pressed light against her knees. She had not chosen this arrangement. Her body had simply arrived here and stayed. The scent in the room was still shifting. She could not smell herself. No Veneri could. But she could feel the difference in the way she could feel sunlight on skin, not seen but present, a change in temperature that had no visible source. Something small had happened. 3 notes from a man who hadn't known he was making them, traveling through metal and wood and dust, finding strings that had been waiting 6 years to be found. Not music, not by any formal definition, but her harmonic receptors had not asked for a formal definition. They had simply responded. Her lower 2 hands pressed slightly harder against her knees, then released. She sat in the quiet and breathed. The flower crown on her head, its petals wilted from weeks of slow forgetting, flushed once at the edges. A faint wash of color. Then it steadied. She watched the shelf. The morning light moved across the instrument's body, slow and indifferent, the way light moves across anything that has been left alone long enough. She had looked at it from this chair so many times that she had stopped seeing it, had turned it into part of the room's furniture, its shape as unremarkable to her as the walls themselves. She was seeing it now. She did not know what to do with that. She stayed in the chair. She waited for the feeling to pass. It did not pass. He came back on Thursday. Different pipe, different panel, same unhurried manner. He came through the maintenance access in the east wall this time, angled his bag in first, and straightened up in the middle of the room with the comfortable authority of a man who knows that rooms exist to be functional and his function was to keep them that way. He had a different pad this time, a thicker one, and he flipped through 2 pages before finding what he was looking for and dropping to one knee near the baseboard. She was in her chair. She had not specifically arranged to be in her chair when he arrived. She had come to the room at her usual time, for her usual reason, and it was coincidence that the maintenance schedule had placed him here again, and it was coincidence that the chair faced the east wall, and it was entirely beside the point that she had told no one about the instrument's vibration, or the scent shift, or the 3 notes, or the fact that for 2 nights she had found herself tracing the shape of a simple melody against her own wrist in the dark. Just 3 notes, just the ghost of something. He found the issue quickly. A compression fitting, slightly loose. He adjusted it with 2 turns of a small wrench, checked it, adjusted it once more. His hands moved with that same precise economy. She watched them without meaning to. He had a small graze on his right knuckle, new since Thursday. The kind of thing you get from a tool that slipped. He hadn't wrapped it. He'd forgotten about it. Probably, or hadn't bothered, or both. She looked at his knuckle. Then she looked at the instrument on the shelf. Then she looked back at his hands. Her petal marks shifted. He was working with his mouth closed this time. Focused, reading something in the wall that only he could interpret. The room was quiet in the old way, the flat dead quiet she had grown accustomed to. And she was aware, in some part of herself she did not have a clean word for, that she was waiting. Not for anything specific, just waiting. The way you wait when something has been promised to you without being promised. He made a small sound of professional satisfaction, wrote something on his pad, and then glanced up at the room properly for the first time. He saw her. He did not startle. He simply registered her presence with the mild surprise of a man who had assumed he was alone and discovered he was not, and who adjusted for this information without particular alarm. He looked at her. She looked at him. He gave a small nod. The functional kind, not deferential, not dismissive, just human, the acknowledgement one person offers another when they share a room and there's nothing requiring comment. Then he looked back at his notes. She breathed out. He started humming. The same 3 notes. She wasn't Satan, he knew he was doing it. His pencil was moving across the pad, recording whatever pipe fitters recorded, and the hum came out of him the way breath comes out. Without announcement, without performance, as a byproduct of a person existing in a space where they felt comfortable enough to be themselves. The strings on the shelf didn't catch it this time. He was too far from the wall, the angle wrong. It didn't matter. Her body heard the notes directly. Her petal marks flushed gold across their full length, all the traceries from collarbone to shoulder filling with color at once, and her upper 2 arms lifted slightly. The motion of someone who has heard their name called from a distance and is not yet sure which direction to turn. She pressed her lower hands flat against her thighs. She did not move from the chair. She could feel the scent coming off her. Floral, warm, present, and knew, abstractly, that any attendant near the door would notice, and knew, more immediately, that she did not. The hum continued for perhaps 15 seconds. Then it stopped. He capped his pen. He had apparently found what he needed in his notes. And because she had not made a plan for this, and because she had not made a plan for anything in the past 6 years except sitting in this chair and watching dust gather on strings, and because 3 notes are a small thing and small things are the only things that had ever, in her experience, turned out to matter, she made a sound. Not speech, not formal speech, just 3 notes, held soft in the back of her throat, shaped by a mouth that was remembering something rather than inventing it. His 3 notes, returned, without knowing she was going to return them, without deciding to. He looked up. He looked at her for a moment, not with alarm, not with the particular careful blankness that everyone at court had learned to wear around her. He looked at her the way someone looks when they've heard something genuinely good and want to acknowledge it without making it larger than it is. He said, "Didn't know you could hum like that." 7 words. Quiet, matter-of-fact, the way he'd say the fitting sorted or the pressure's good. Not performing anything, not understanding what he was addressing. His mouth curved slightly at one corner. It was the expression of someone paying an ordinary compliment, the kind given and received and forgotten in the same breath, gone before the air had finished carrying it. She did not move. The notes were sitting inside her like something she had swallowed. She thought, "No one has said anything to me like that in 6 years. Not those words, not that tone, not in that voice with that half curve at the corner." She thought, he said it like it cost him nothing. She thought, it cost him nothing. And she understood, then, with her harmonic receptors still lit and her petal marks still flushed gold and the scent in the room still warm, that the things which cost nothing to give are often the things that mean the most to the person receiving them. Because they are not given as sacrifice. They are given as certainty, as ordinary fact. You can hum like that. Of course you can. It is obvious. It is just a thing that is true. He glanced back at his notes. He wrote something brief. He was moving on. She sat very still, holding the sentence. Something had to be done about the pipes. This was the conclusion reached, in writing, by the Palace Infrastructure Office 3 days later, following a formal request from the Queen's household for expedited maintenance review of the North and East residential subcorridors, the music room specifically, which had apparently developed a persistent series of issues requiring regular attention. The Infrastructure Office was pleased to comply. The Queen's household did not often make specific maintenance requests. It was good to be needed. The pipe fitter was assigned to Wednesdays. He didn't know why this particular room kept generating issues. He was not the suspicious sort, and the pipes were genuinely old, and every time he came there was something reasonable to check. So he checked it, and he came on Wednesdays, and he hummed while he worked because that was what he did when he was comfortable, and he was comfortable here because the room was quiet and the light was good, and the Queen, while present, did not make demands or ask him questions or seem to want anything from him at all. His lullaby, if 3 notes repeated could be called that, was later transcribed by a junior court archivist who had been tasked, at the Queen's indirect suggestion, with documenting all sounds occurring in the music room over a 14-day period. The transcription was analyzed by 2 senior cultural historians for hidden political coding. They produced a 12-page report concluding that the recurring melodic fragment contained no discernible diplomatic signal, no embedded territorial claim, no encrypted notation from any known musical tradition, and no symbolic content of any kind. It was, the report determined, simply a man who was happy with his work. The report was filed. The archivist was reassigned. The Queen read it once and set it aside. She had known already. That was, she understood now, precisely the point. She had not laughed in the room. Not yet, and maybe not for some time, because 6 years is a long time to be quiet, and the road back from that was its own kind of slow. But something in her had stopped bracing. The part of her that had been waiting for the silence to become permanent had, very quietly, revised its expectations. She did not know what to call it. She did not try. On the shelf, the small instrument was gone. Not gone from the room, just gone from the shelf. She had moved it on a Tuesday, the day between his visits, when she had gone to the room for her usual hour and found herself standing under the shelf with her upper 2 hands already reaching before she'd thought about reaching. She had brought it to the table beside her chair. She had set it down. She had sat back and looked at it for a long time. She had not played it. On Wednesday morning, the room smelled of flowers. Not faintly, not the thin thread of something almost returning. Warmly, fully, the way a room smells when the person in it is not bracing against anything, when the body has decided, below the level of decision, that here is safe. He came through the panel at the usual time, found the usual thing to check, worked in his usual way, unhurried, precise, quiet except for the 3 notes that arrived after a few minutes and settled into the room like light settling into a space through an open window. She was in her chair. The instrument was on the table beside her. He did not ask about it. She did not explain it. He had probably noticed it moved, in the way a person notices small changes in a room they visit regularly, and had filed it alongside everything else he did not ask about because it was not his job to ask, and he was not the sort of person who asked when silence was easier. He hummed. She breathed it in. He finished, packed his bag, gave her the small functional nod, the one she had come to know as his, only his, the specific shape of his particular acknowledgement, and went back through the panel. The door closed. The instrument sat on the table. He never asked why it was there. She never told him she had moved it the day he hummed. And every Wednesday, she waited. What happens to someone who's been silent for 6 years? When one small sound finds them. When something that cost nothing, given by someone who didn't know they were giving it, turns out to be the thing that unlocks a door no ceremony ever could. Carry that question somewhere quiet.